Welcome to Candid Conversations with Candidates, brought to you by Crowing Power in partnership with Lakes Media Collaborative and the Brainerd Lakes Chamber. I'm Lisa Paxton, and it's my pleasure to welcome Ron Kresha. Ron is a candidate for State House District 9B. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you.
Good to have you here today. Why don't we open with your comments?
Okay. So I guess the best place to start is a little bit about me. My background is I started in education, and I am the father and happily married man of 19 years of 5 children. And in education, I started off with English and then moved to technology and curriculum. From there, I launched a company in Little Falls. I co-founded it along with another gentleman of Atomic Learning, and we moved to online education. I left that company 5 years ago to pursue my interests in rural economic development, and have now started another company that does economic development for rural counties and cities. A big part of what I am is about rural growth and bringing jobs and employers and employees into the rural parts of Minnesota, which fits very nicely with the Morrison and Todd County area that I cover. And so what really propelled me into moving into office and seeking election for the House of Representatives is my passion for keeping jobs in Morrison and Todd County, as well as growing them. We have a population base that is senior, and we need to continue to bring in younger families and companies that can attract those younger families to keep our tax base here, to keep our jobs here, as well as to keep our kids here. So that's me.
All right, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
We're going to roll into some questions.
Excellent.
And you talked about yourself in your opening comments, so let's learn, what are 3 things that distinguish you from the other candidate?
Probably the top 3 things that the top 3 things that distinguish me are experience. I have the experience in fields, whether it's finance, in government, starting businesses, education, and an agriculture background from when I grew up. So I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, and I've failed at a lot, I've succeeded at a lot. And in all of that, I know the pitfalls and the success points of working with efficient government, lean government, and moving more to a private sector, innovative culture. So that's number 1, is the experience side. The second thing that distinguishes me from my candidate, or from my opponent, is my network. I know a lot of people. When I was a president and CFO in Atomic Learning, and then moving on to the CEO that I am now at Golden Shovel, I've learned the value of expanding your network, bringing people together to get them around a common cause. And one of the common causes that we have here is rural economic development. And it's getting all of the leaders in the area together, getting them focused on the same goal, which is bringing jobs in and bringing companies and securing that future. And the third thing is my experience with my family. I have 4 daughters and a son, a beautiful family and a wonderful wife. And we've been very involved in the church. I've been on the church council, I've been on the school board. I know the ins and outs of education, and firsthand I've experienced all the values that are very central to Minnesota here, to rural Minnesota, whether that's the pro-life issue or the schools that we need to keep local. So I've been through all of that. So those are the 3 things that I would say distinguish me from my opponent.
Great. You talked about rural economies. How would you grow Minnesota's economy? Well,
that's a good question. I'm going to break it down a little bit, because my primary focus would be the rural areas. And one of the things that I found was that many companies, when they start off or when they look to move to Minnesota, they sometimes look right to the metro area. They look to the suburbs, whether it's a St. Cloud or Rochester, Duluth, or the Twin Cities. And I want to approach those companies and let them know that the rural areas of Minnesota, whether they be Morrison and Todd County, are excellent areas to grow. They have a wonderful labor base. You have what can be deemed as a very friendly government, because those local governments are very willing to work with these companies. So it's important to let them know that they need to look at these rural areas. There's wonderful areas. So that would be what I would push for.
Okay, let's talk about the state budget. What are your recommendations to balance the next state budget?
Probably the biggest thing to look at the state budget is we have to change the curve. We continue to have these built-in increases in areas, and we're going to have to look at not just putting the budget on autopilot, not just looking at 2 to 3% increases without looking at areas that we can cut. And so in order to balance the budget, we've got to make sure that obviously the revenues and the expenses match. One of the things as a CFO, you know that everything has to balance, otherwise you just don't get through the year, and our government isn't very good at that. I, on the other hand, will make sure that I support any legislation or any budgets that are going to hold those expenses down to revenues so that we just don't have a runaway budget.
Okay. Transportation is really important to rural Minnesota.
Yep.
What is your solution to Minnesota's unmet transportation needs?
Well, one of the things that we need to continue to look at is the infrastructure of roads. And with the last budget cycle that was passed, the main part of the bonding bill was for roads and infrastructure, and that has to be key, that has to be there. And I don't think we should be taking away from any type of road projects for anything that we can't fund, whether that's an extraneous project that doesn't really focus on making sure that we're moving people efficiently in and out of the rural areas so they can get to the areas they need. So I think first and foremost we just have to make sure that we keep our roads and our highways safe and keep them passable and efficient.
Okay. As someone with a background with education, let's talk education for a minute.
Okay.
What do you think is the state's role in workforce development?
One of the biggest things that I think the state can do to help in workforce development is to slow themselves down with the regulations and tie in the hands of local companies. For example, there's dollars out there for training, there's dollars out there for workforce development, but the state puts so many regulations on how they can be done. For example, if you look at Little Falls, we have a company that really needs some workforce training and some high-end manufacturing equipment. But the dollars that are for that program are only to be held through a welding program or a technical program that would go through a college, and it doesn't allow it to flow through some external sources such as an online school or a school overseas. The reason I say overseas is because the company that I'm thinking of, the equipment comes from Germany, and the only people that can train them are the people that have these education institutions overseas. So we need to make sure that those dollars are freely used for all the manufacturers, all the companies, and not just pigeonholed into areas of the state that we can't access.
Okay. Let's talk about healthcare for our last question. Minnesota's healthcare spending is expected to double in the next 10 years. How would you address the rising cost of healthcare?
Well, I come from the private sector, and I very much believe in the privatization and holding things such as healthcare to the private sector. One of the things that we're going to be facing is the decision on how we're going to handle health exchanges, how we're going to handle the Affordable Care Act that's going to be coming into Minnesota. And all of those things, while they expand and they add many, many people to a healthcare system, they also add the costs. And my biggest concern is not that we're providing care. My biggest concern is that these programs are only going to put in preventive care. They're going to increase the costs, and they're going to make it actually harder for people to get the health care they need. So I'm very much in favor of looking at a private solution. One of the things that I have noticed, when you take duties away from the government, that opens up positions for the private sector to come in, which means more jobs. So to me, the private innovation sector is where I would head with that.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for joining us for Candid Conversations with Candidates. See us at votebrainerdlakes.com, and remember, vote November 6th.